Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Ramanjeet Kaur Johal. I am a professor of public administration at Punjab University, Chandigarh. The module we are going to discuss today is titled Politicization of Civil Services, Issues of Anonymity, Neutrality and Commitment, and the relationship between the political and permanent executive. We discuss all this within the context of the Indian civil services having been adopted and adapted from the British civil service, which is based on the legal rational model of Weberian bureaucracy. This model emphasizes the principles of neutrality and anonymity. Historically, this model is the most perfect model for efficient working. However, over time, historically, things have changed and the relationship between the permanent and the political executive has also changed, pre-independence and post-independence. This module discusses all these issues and relationships in detail. Civil services are the backbone of Indian administration. Anonymity, neutrality and commitment are the hallmark of an efficient civil service. These principles were designed to protect civil servants from any external factor which might act as a hurdle in carrying out their duties and functions. However, due to increase in the role of civil services, they are involved in providing services to the public and also guiding and assisting the political executive in respect of mobilization of resources for developmental purposes. The process of mobilization, creation and distribution of resources necessitates a continuous interaction between the civil servants, political leaders and people. This increased interaction has resulted in the politicization of the civil service. Over the period of time, politicization of civil services has undermined these hallmarks of the efficient civil service. The civil servants are no more neutral and anonymous and are more committed to the political parties rather than laws and in certain cases indulge in political activities. Thus, with the politicization of civil service has come the deterioration of the quality of civil services in India. This has also affected the development and welfare of the people adversely. The civil services model is based on Weber's model of legal rational authority, and the features are that there is a merit system, there is division of labor, hierarchy, rules, written documents, career orientation and impersonality. With these features, the role of the civil services is to maintain law and order, to provide public services, to implement national and state policies, to act as agents of social change, and to play an important role in policy making. However, when civil servants develop personal political consideration or political considerations are forced upon them while carrying out their official duties, it is a situation of politicization of the civil service. When they willingly or unwillingly follow the instructions which are influenced by political considerations. The system of Indian civil services was borrowed from England during the British period. The Government of India Acts of 1909 and 1919 sowed the seeds of politicization by introducing political representatives. After independence, the system of apolitical and neutral civil services was retained. In the initial years, the politicization was minimal as the political bosses themselves remained committed to the objectives of nation building. Change in the leadership in the following years resulted in waning of the apolitical character of civil services. A number of factors contributed to politicization, like emergence of multiple political parties based on caste, religion, region, etc., the purpose of politics changing from welfare of the masses to cater to specific interests, and the civil servants and political leaders becoming more motivated by self-interest rather than general interest. The impact of politicization of civil services that promotions were given either to undeserving officers or denied to deserving ones. Transfer was used as a tool of punishment for those who were reluctant to obey arbitrary orders. False cases were initiated against honest officers. Those civil servants who were ready to further the interest of the political leaders were placed in vital positions, often even in violation of administrative norms and practices. Politicization was further evident when top positions were seen to be filled on political considerations and not on the basis of merit. Such occurrences weakened the independence and confidence of senior civil servants. It encouraged them to develop political affiliations to get best positions in the administration. It also became a method to avoid the displeasure of the political bosses. Anonymity is another feature of a civil service that implies that the civil servants work behind the scene and decisions are taken in the name of the government. Civil servants, being the think tank of the department, provide valuable policy advice to the minister and are not given credit or blame for the policy advice given to the minister. Anonymity ensures the impartiality of the civil servant, so they focus only on the efficient and effective policy decisions and provide fair and honest advice in favor of the welfare of the people. It is also closely associated with the principle of ministerial responsibility. The minister, being the political head of the department, is responsible for all the decisions taken. Anonymity provides a sense of security and impartiality to civil servants. They can perform their duties efficiently. In recent years, civil service anonymity has begun to be eroded for a variety of reasons. Some of these are: there have been committees set up from time to time to scrutinize the activities of government departments, and this has put the civil servants under scrutiny. Members of Parliament frequently question civil servants about the advice they give ministers. Increasing media interest in government affairs has also brought the civil servants into the public arena. There have been numerous instances where the ministers do not hesitate to name and blame civil servants, as opposed to accepting responsibility for their department's actions. Further, the use of social media by civil servants has led to public disclosure of frank and fearless advice earlier confined to a private office, thus making it a matter of public debate. Another feature of bureaucracy is neutrality. The principle of neutrality implies impartiality and non-partisan nature of civil services. Neutrality infers that civil servants must abstain from any active political participation or association and administer the policy as finalized by the political executive. A politically neutral civil service is when there is clear distinction between the policy making and policy implementation tasks. Civil servants are to serve the government of the day irrespective of its political color. There are many advantages to the concept of neutrality. It boosts public confidence in civil service due to its non-political character. It builds the confidence of ministers in the loyalty of their permanent civil servants, and it ensures high morale of civil servants based on the confidence that promotions and personnel decisions would be made not on the basis of political consideration but on merit. However, this concept has been eroded. There are various reasons for its erosion. Effective policy coordination and guidance requires officials who are loyal to the responsible minister and are committed to their policy. While carrying out the developmental tasks, certain commitment to the goals and objectives of the state is inescapable. At the top level, the performance appraisal of civil servants is done by political heads, and an element of political consideration is bound to creep into such a rating. It has become difficult in the present time to separate the policy advice and execution. Civil servants are involved in political decision making, and it becomes difficult to stay neutral on the issues and problems which regularly confront them. Commitment is a concept which is alien to bureaucracy. However, the concept emerged in India with the concern expressed by Mrs. Indira Gandhi the then Prime Minister, over the incapacity of the civil services to achieve developmental goals due to an impartial, anonymous, and neutral character. The Indian civil service was criticized as unresponsive and indifferent towards the developmental policies and the plight of the people. The concept of committed civil services was emphasized, in which civil servants are more committed towards achieving the objectives of the Constitution. We now go on to talk about the political and permanent executive in the Indian situation. India is the largest democracy in the world. After independence, India adopted a parliamentary form of government where executive is responsible to the legislature. The executive branch of the government consists of two parts, that is, the political and the permanent executive. The latter is non-political. The political branch consists of the Council of Ministers, that is the Prime Minister, the Cabinet Ministers, Ministers of State and Deputy Ministers. The permanent executive consists of civil servants. They aid, advise and assist political executives to carry out their duties efficiently and effectively. The political executive is bound by the principle of ministerial and collective responsibility and is accountable to the Parliament. The supreme authority in policy formulation and implementation is vested in it. The policies of the nation are given concrete shape by the political executive. The political executive requires a body of officials, namely the permanent executive, that serves as an organ which provides assistance to deal with all the administrative technicalities, make available necessary information for policy formulation, and enforce the policies that have been finalized by the political executive. The Constitution of India provides for the civil service, that is, the permanent executive, who aid, advise, and assist the political executive in carrying out its duties efficiently and effectively. The functions and roles of the political and permanent executive are fairly clearly demarcated. The political executive formulates policies, makes decisions on important issues, supervises the implementation of policies, decides on larger administrative questions, makes appointments to top positions in the government, and intervenes in administration to redress legitimate public grievances. Whereas the permanent executive implements policies and decisions of the government, it provides information, facts, and ethical judgments needed in policy making to the political executive. It directs and supervises the work of subordinates, and it maintains continuity in administration. FIFNA has enumerated the points of distinction between the political executive and the civil servant by saying that the ministers are amateurs, whereas the civil servants are professionals. Ministers are non-technical, civil servants are technical. Ministers are partisan, whereas civil servants are non-partisan. They are temporary, whereas civil servants are permanent. Ministers have more public contacts, civil servants have less public contacts. Ministers have more legislative contacts, whereas civil servants don't. They have a more important role in policy formulation as opposed to the civil servants. They have a more important decision-making role, whereas the civil servants have an advisory role. And ministers are dependent on the technical opinion of the civil servants, who collect the technical data from study and research to provide this opinion. There are various factors which have determined the relationship between the political executive and the permanent executive. Historical factors seen change in the nature of relationship between the pre-independence and post-independence period. Now a lack of unity which is seen because the harmony in relationship relies upon the consensus of the societal goals that are to be pursued. The divergence of interests and lack of common development goals in developing countries such as India is reflected in the lack of unity between the working of the two executives. Social factors also determine this relationship. The division in social origin not only brings the two diametrically opposite sections of society into power, but brings forward their paradoxical style of management and understanding of society, culture, people, and politics. Political executive works to fulfill electoral promises which can be based on vested interests. On the other hand, permanent executive focuses more on efficient policies for overall development. In the pre-independence era, the minister-secretary relationship came into existence with the Government of India Acts of 1919 and 1935. Ministers were given charge of the department, having permanent heads or secretaries belonging mostly to the Indian civil service. The appointments, transfers, and promotion of the permanent officials were controlled by the governor and not by the ministers under whom they worked. This new office of popularly elected ministers was not easily accepted by the civil servants. There was friction and conflict between the minister and secretaries because of suspicion and lack of mutual understanding. In the post-independence era, the politicians were given the top position along with adequate authority to carry out their functions. Administrators had to work under their control. Ministers faced opposition from civil servants of higher ranks. They wanted to run the administration as per their own guidelines, ignoring the political executive. On the other hand, for some ministers, the administrative role was new, and they preferred to follow the decisions of their secretaries instead of opposing them or creating a situation of confrontation. Similarly, the newly promoted officers, in view of adjusting themselves in their new role, followed the directions of ministers. Therefore, apart from the confrontation between the two, a supportive attitude had also started developing. The constitutional provisions also provide for a doctrine of separation of powers between the legislature, executive, and judiciary, which is the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. Articles 53 and 164 vest the executive power in the President and the Governor for the respective states. Articles 77 and 166 similarly vest the President and the Governor the powers of framing rules for conduct of business in the union and state governments respectively. The work of the government is allocated as per the Government of India allocation of business rules. The Government of India transaction of business rules define the manner in which the civil servants are required to assist the President or the Governor to exercise his or her executive functions. The second administrative reforms in its report identified 6 areas of friction between the permanent and the political executive, namely the concept of neutrality, the advisory role of civil servants in policy making, the statutory role of civil servants, the discharge of delegated functions, the appointments, recruitments to civil services, and the transfers and postings of civil servants. The Commission said that the concept of neutrality implied that the civil servants should give free and frank advice to the government impartially without any political consideration. However, civil servants have now become politically conscious, and the civil service is, in the public perception, often seen as increasingly politicized. In this regard, Paul Appleby had observed that the role of civil servants is to render free and frank advice which should not be colored by any political consideration. The second ARC opined that this political neutrality and impartiality needs to be maintained. Regarding the advisory role of civil servants in policy making, the civil servants, being usually occupied in routine administrative work, fail to contribute effectively in the policy advice function. The Second Administrative Reforms Commission recommended the separation of staff and line functions of the senior civil servants so that they get adequate time to focus on their policy advice role. The statutory provisions regarding the role of the civil servants are very clear, like they have the role of the executive magistrate under the Criminal Procedure Code. The civil servants play the role of an assessing officer under the Income Tax Act. the role of a station house officer under the Criminal Procedure Code and the respective police acts. However, these statutory roles see in their performance great interference of the senior officials and ministers. The second ARC recommended in its report on ethics and governance that abuse of authority, unduly favoring or harming someone, and obstruction of justice should be classified as an offence. Regarding the discharge of delegated functions by the civil service, due to lack of time, pressure of work, and increased complexities of legislation, the legislature makes laws in the skeletal form and delegates power to the executive to fill in the details. Administration is carried out by delegating authority and responsibility to civil servants at different levels in government. The second ARC pointed out the increasing interference in decision making of the subordinate functionaries. This interference affects the relationship of the political and permanent executive adversely. Regarding appointments or recruitment to the civil services, Union Public Service Commission enjoys unblemished reputation for having a fair and transparent recruitment system without any outside interference or influence. This is a constitutional body. However, the state public service commissions, also constitutional bodies, do not enjoy the same reputation, and there are many complaints against the recruitments recommended by these commissions. The second ARC has laid down norms to avoid favoritism, nepotism, corruption, and abuse of power that have often characterized these recruitment exercises. They have listed that the principles for a well-defined merit-based procedure for recruitment to all government jobs requires that there should be wide publicity and open competition for recruitment to all positions. There should be minimization, if not elimination, of discretion in the recruitment process. The selection should be primarily on the basis of written examination or on the basis of performance in existing public exams, with minimum weightage to interview. Regarding transfers and postings of civil servants, it is seen that these are done often with political considerations rather than administrative merit. The National Commission to Review the Working of the Constitution, various pay commissions, and ARCs have pointed out this interference. This leads to lack of efficiency in the administration, as civil servants would rather focus on pleasing their political masters to get the desired posting or to avoid any unwanted transfer. So there are major conflicts which have been occurring in the Indian civil service over the past many decades. It has become the norm to see that there is an administrative shuffle after the change in the political power at the center as well as the state levels. There have been many instances of unceremonious postings of civil servants. As far back as 1957, the then Finance Minister T.T. Krishnamachari removed H.M. Patel, the then Finance Secretary. In 1966, Gulzari Lal Nandaji, the then Home Minister, removed Sri L.P. Singh as Secretary. In 71, Mr. Hanumanthaiah, then Railway Minister, removed Mr. Ganguly, then Chairman of the Railway Board. In 82, we saw the Railway Minister, Mr. Ghani Khan Chaudhary, remove the then Chairman of the Railway Board. And in 1987, we saw Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, the then Prime Minister, remove Mr. Shastri, the then Agriculture Minister. The major reason for the friction or confrontation is the lack of understanding and cooperation between the two. The absence of understanding can be attributed to the following reasons. The portfolios of the ministers change frequently, which does not provide adequate time to both minister and secretary to develop proper trust and understanding. The free and independent advice of civil servants, when it is unpalatable to the ministers, is considered as an obstruction. They do not appreciate the value of independent advice. Some civil servants, by habit, expose themselves and criticize individual ministers or their policies in private and social circles. and the political bosses react strongly to such criticism. The minister and secretary often, in the absence of clarity of their respective roles, interfere in each other's sphere. Ministers often give the impression of helplessness to politicians, legislators, etc. to do certain work because the officers of the department write unfavorable notes. Civil servants have come to be identified with particular political parties and have lost their impartiality, neutrality, and credibility. To develop an environment of cordial relationship between the two executives, there is need to address the reasons behind the conflicts. Keeping this in view, the Administrative Reforms Commission recommended the minister should create an environment of fearlessness and fair play among senior officers and encourage free and impartial advice. The Prime Minister should take an interest to arrest the growth of unhealthy relations between the two. The minister should not intervene in the day-to-day administration except in case of grave injustice, serious default, or maladministration on the part of civil servants. The secretary should show greater sensitivity towards the minister's difficulties and develop a cooperative attitude. All major decisions should be reduced in writing, particularly where political executive differs from the permanent executive on an important issue. Political neutrality and impartiality of the civil services needs to be preserved. Separation of staff and line functions of the senior civil servants is important so that they get adequate time to focus on the policy advice role. Unnecessary interference of the senior officials and ministers in statutory functions of the civil servants needs to be checked with strict measures. Fair system of recruitment should be ensured. The second ARC has laid down norms to avoid complaints of favoritism, nepotism, corruption, and abuse of power that have often characterized the recruitment system. Political interference in transfer and postings of civil servants should be avoided so as to ensure efficiency in administration. Dear students, we have now come to the end of this module and we would like to sum it up by picking up the important issues that have been discussed. This module has talked about the issues of anonymity, neutrality, and commitment. And it has also talked about the relationship between the political and the permanent executive. All this within the understanding that there is a historical context. Thus, the civil service in India was a pre-independence civil service which did not have the issue of dealing with the political executive. This Weberian legal rational civil service upheld both anonymity and neutrality while performing its functions of law and order administration and revenue administration. However, post-independence, the situation changed. The civil service had many more demands on it with enhanced functions of development and welfare. It was now a civil service that had to deal with the citizens also as well as with political masters. These were new situations and there were both positive and negative fallouts of the same in terms of the relationship between the political and the permanent executive. On the one hand, the political executive recognized that the civil service had the expertise and they were amateurs and needed the expertise and technical advice of the civil service. But on the other hand, this political executive also believed that they needed to exercise their independence and authority, and therefore they began to control the civil services in many ways when there was a disagreement between what was advised and what was sought to be achieved by the political powers. Therefore, there are many instances of disharmony between the two. The Second Administrative Reforms Commission has given a set of recommendations which talk about how this relationship can be better effective and maintained. It talks about the confidence that must be inspired on both sides so that the permanent executive does not believe that they are being interfered with and the political executive does not believe that they are being undermined. Therefore, they can give free and fair advice to the political executive.